just for the benefit of the people who see this recording some way down the line, we're now allowing people in to the panel. So we might be quiet for the next minute or two, but this will still happen, don't worry.
Hang on, it's all right. Just 2 seconds.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Oliver May. I'm the Vice Chair of Neurodiversity in Law. Thank you very much for attending today. As a thrilling piece of housekeeping, can I ask you all to please mute yourselves when you're not speaking to prevent any interference? That's, of course, particularly important for the guests, the attendees, the non-panelists. So as stated, I'm Oliver May. I'm here going to be chairing today for this event. And what's going to be happening today is a two-part event, really. The first is going to be what's been titled a Q&A session. Now, for practical reasons, that being that there are 50-odd attendees and 9 panelists, I'll be asking the questions and taking them to the panelists in turn. If you yourself have a question, please do put it in the chat box, and if we have time for them, we will come to them towards the end. And then the second half of this event is that there's going to be 2 interviews, 2 very short practice interviews with 2 very brave volunteers who are going to let all of you watch them be interviewed, watch their answers, and then watch them get some feedback. The Q&A will be recorded for people who want to view this perhaps near the time of the scholarship interviews themselves. The interviews won't be recorded to save the blushes of those 2 very brave volunteers. If you have, for any reason, an objection to the fact that you might be recorded, please do turn your camera off, change your name on your Zoom call and so on, and feel free to anonymize yourself in that way. Please don't do it with a too risque a comment, though. Now, the attendees, the panelists today, who very generously given up their time, cover the breadth of the Inns of Court. So we've got a full range of opinions here. And indeed, we've got both a barrister and a non-barrister from each Inn of Court, all of whom have received or been involved in scholarships in one way or another. From the Inner Temple, we've got Daniel Wand, who practices at 4 King's Bench Walk. And we've got Danielle Gleischer Bates, who's a member of the executive team at Neurodiversity in Law. From Middle Temple, we've got Fen Greatly Hirsch, who's a barrister at Broadway House Chambers. And the 2 members of the ND in Law executive are Sophie Stevens and Emma Lanwarn. From Lincoln's Inn, we've got Lady Jeannie Vashkovich from 25 Bedford Row, who will be joining us later, but she will be joining to be the barrister representative of Lincoln's Inn. And we've got Roxy Lakshevich Martin, who is the ND in Law representative. And then from Gray's Inn, we've got Richard Ashuge of Brickcourt Chambers. Richard, I do apologise if I've murdered your pronunciation of your surname there. And Jack Boswell to help us out from the ND in Law perspective as well. Now, this is going to take some management as it is, so without any further ado, I'm going to dive right into the questions. If anyone has a burning point for me, please do directly message me in the chat privately, and I will do my best to accommodate for it. So, Fen, could you please talk to us about how people can stand out in their written applications?
Yes, thanks, Oliver. Good evening, everyone. Just before I answer that, I'd just like to say hello. My name's Fen Greatly Hirsch. I said I'm a barrister at Broadway House Chambers. That's on the Northeastern Circuit. So I'm based in Leeds and Bradford, practicing predominantly in family, criminal and employment law. I'm a member of Middle Temple. I was lucky enough to be awarded the Queen Mother Scholarship in 2016 alongside a Blackstone entrance exhibition. That was when I was in the final year of my undergraduate degree in law and French law at Warwick. I then did a master's overseas in public international law, came back to do the bar course at BPP up here in Leeds, and then started pupillage at Broadway House Chambers, and I accepted tenancy there in November last year. How to stand out in written applications. Certainly, speaking for Middle Temple, I know that Middle Temple is in a position to interview all candidates who are eligible. So it's not necessarily the case that there's a paper sift, and if you don't meet the grade, your application will be dismissed, as may be the case, certainly at the pupillage stage, if not at the scholarship stage. But the first thing I would say in terms of standing out, and it may sound basic, but you would be surprised, is to just make sure that you have read all of the instructions on the application form. You would be surprised how often, for example, the question says that you should answer this question in maximum 200 words. And when I review an application, I see that that particular answer is 212 words or 250 words, or going the other way, it's woefully short, and you think, well, has this candidate really used the full space available to them? Beyond that, it's also things, again, that should seem relatively obvious, and I'm sure to many of the attendees it will be, but it's things like having good spelling and grammar. It goes a long way, making sure that you've got good punctuation, you've not got typos in there. So as a very basic, just having an application that is readable and doesn't create any problems for the person who is screening it. After that, it then becomes a bit more nuanced and a bit more strategic. Personally, I think that although you should obviously work on each question individually and kind of, you'll probably need to workshop your drafts to each question. I'm sure you'll all be doing that. But it's important to also think about the application that you make as a whole. It is an overall piece of advocacy. It's a case that you're presenting for. It's a very important case why you should be given a scholarship. So it's kind of, you're demonstrating your potential as an advocate in the very application. And so I think it's how well you use the words that are allocated to you. So I would say you can stand out by covering a lot of ground through the questions that are asked. So, for example, everyone will have a certain number of examples that they will want to draw on from their experience, whether it's formal experience like mini pupillages and mooting and so on, or examples of roles they've fulfilled on committees at universities. But it's striking the right balance between which examples to use in response to which questions, so that you're not repeating yourself, you're managing to get the most information in there, and matching each piece of evidence, as it were, to the most appropriate heading. I think you can also stand out by coming across as human. So that while it's obviously it's human nature to want to perfect these things, and again, if I'm telling you that you should make sure that you've spelled everything right and drafted it so that it's within the word limit, there is often a danger that you can workshop, you can overwork some of your answers, and they don't really sound like you, or perhaps taking it to an extreme, sometimes they don't even sound human. I've read some answers that you think, I think this person probably should have stopped 2 drafts or 3 drafts ago. It doesn't sound like a human has written it. So I think still keeping a sense of yourself in there, I think that's a good litmus test if someone else has read it, maybe even someone who knows you but isn't necessarily in law. So they're not necessarily screening for how persuasive how persuasive your examples are, but just, me, does this seem like I've written it? That's generally quite a good test, because there are so many applicants, and it's good to remind people that that there's a strong voice coming through, and in that sense, I mean, it comes down to whether or not there's a voice, but also whether there's a story. So I think I would say often when you're given the opportunity to provide examples, whether it's conflicts that you've demonstrated, that you've resolved, or ethical situations you've been in, or times you've had to persuade people, or obviously why the core questions like why you want to come to the bar, what area of law, etc., what you think makes a good advocate. I would always err on the side of giving a more personal answer than a generic answer that someone else could have written. Because I think if something is authentic and organic, it's more likely to sound like you. But when you're using examples, do use examples from your own life, try to cover a good spread of time. And if you can engineer it such that it shows kind of a development, like I've read some very good examples of applications recently where I've seen candidates giving examples from when they were in school, right up to when they were at university and more recently. So you have a real sense of what this person's interested in and what they've been through. And effectively, I guess the long and short of it is just that this is just a taste of what your candidacy is like. So ideally you want to leave the reader wanting more. So I'll leave it at that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Fen. Thank you. Dan, can I ask you what the best way for applicants is to prepare for interview, both in terms of, say, the run-up and the week before, and in terms of what they should be doing on the day itself?
Sure. Thanks very much, Ollie, and good evening to everyone, and thanks for coming along. As Ollie said at the start, my name is Daniel Wand. I'm a barrister practicing from 4 Kings Bench Walk. I've got a broad common law practice, but it's mainly focused on civil and commercial litigation, chancery matters and public law. I received a major scholarship from the Inner Temple, as well as a couple of other more minor scholarships for other things. So I have some experience of the interview process. There's 2 broad things I want to talk about. One of them pertains mainly to it certainly pertains mainly to Inner Temple, but no doubt the other inns have a similar type of process that they go through. And the other comments I want to make are rather more generic. In terms of the more specific one to Inner Temple, when I did my interview, and I've just checked and it remains the same at the present time, there is a requirement that when you go to the interview, you'll be provided with a short case. You need to read that case within a period of, I think, 15 or 20 minutes. And then you'll be asked to perhaps summarize that case and then be asked questions on it. That's a core part of the interview process. It seems it's designed to test your ability to absorb information and then provide an explanation about the information you've read and give your opinion on it. And to be successful in doing that, it's simply a matter of practice. What I would suggest and what I did is take a number of cases that you're not particularly familiar with and practice reading that case within 15 or 20 minutes, for example. Perhaps start with a bit longer, and as you go through more and more cases, try and speed up and do it as fast as you can. And whilst you're reading them, try and think about the types of things that are going to come up in the questions. So, for example, you want to look out for what the ratio of the case is, what any obiter comments were, what the issues were that were raised within the case, how they were resolved, what the key themes were of the case, and also the key arguments that were put forward by both parties in the case, which should be recorded within the judgment. And practice then writing down and then delivering orally to yourself answers to the questions that you think will come from the panel. I don't know how many, but certainly more than 10, if not up towards 20 of these practices. And it really, really helped. When I got to the interview, I felt confident reading the case and delivering answers on it during the interview process. That's that aspect of the interview. And the second aspect is more generic. And this is really, it starts with knowing your application. So you need to know your application inside out, word for word. You don't want to be caught out by anything in there. then what you want to do from that is go back to the specific answers that you've given, and no doubt most of those forms will have a question about why you want to be a barrister, or what skills you have that are going to assist you in being a barrister. And what I would do is not prepare a verbatim answer, but prepare a framework answer that highlights the key points you want to talk about. Because I find if you prepare a verbatim answer, it doesn't sound particularly natural when you're talking to the panel. One of the things you want to get across is being very much yourself, as Fen has said, and a prepared answer doesn't let you do that. If necessary, however, do write a verbatim answer. For some people, it makes you feel comfortable. It's something you can defer to if you stumble with your words during the interview process. But make sure you have practiced that answer in a way that allows you to speak more naturally than simply reading an answer out or reciting it from memory. It's also important that when you're giving your answer about why you want to be a barrister, or the skills you have, try and link it back to your personal experiences. And I know Fen already picked up on this in relation to your written application, but it's the same when you're giving your answers to the interview panel orally. Explain to them why particular experiences have led you down the path of wanting to be a barrister, because the interview panel really want to get to know why you are suitable for a career at the bar, and are you going to be someone who's going to be staying at the bar for a long period of time, because these inns are investing money in you. And to do that, you need to show them that you've thought carefully about what being a barrister involves and why you want to be a barrister, and put that forward in your answer. And the same applies to particular skills. Don't just tell the panel what your skills are, show them what your skills are through the experiences you've had, perhaps mooting successes or jobs that you've done in the past, whether legal or non-legal. And again, convey some personality in that answer. The panel want to, as I've said, get to know you as a person. So any chance you have to drop in something interesting about yourself or spark some conversation with the panel, do try and do that. You should also try and keep your answers succinct, clear and concise. That's interesting and more engaging. Probably the opposite of what I've done now. So it's definitely a case of do what I say, don't do what I do. And also, finally, try and be yourself. It's very difficult in false interview situations, but the panel want to see you as a person. Don't try and play the role of a barrister or the role that you think a barrister plays, because the panel will see through that. Simply be yourself. Finally, on the day, just one tip from me: don't over prepare. Read your application form through again, perhaps read your prepared answers through again, or your prepared bullet points, but then stay away from it, go to the interview, go with a clear head, and I find that helps me relax and it helps me give better answers during the interview. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dan. Danielle, I'm going to come to you next. And given we've heard a lot about time pressure and so on from Daniel, it'd be very useful to hear from you on reasonable adjustments in the interview context.
Hi everyone, so as Ollie said, I'm Danielle and I'm Head of Membership and GDPR for Neurodiversity in Law. I'm currently on the bar course at City University with the LLM, and I was awarded the Exhibition Award in 2020. Reasonable adjustments I feel quite passionately about. I've had my own difficulties receiving them. Thankfully not for my interview. I want to dispel any myth or stigma that you're any less of a candidate because you have reasonable adjustments. If you need them, and you should fully use them. When it comes to getting them, I think you need to be very clear about what exactly you need. You're most likely dealing with people who have no idea about your condition, and you need to kind of give them all of the details of what you need. And also, if you could, it's different now that everything's online, so you don't have to rely on them to take paper or overlays for you, but if you could do your own reasonable adjustments, if that's screen tinting, PDF tinting, kind of rely on yourself where you can. Obviously, you still need to tell them, and things like extra time you need to tell them about, and they're usually really, really helpful. And my experience with Inner was that I received my adjustments and it made a real difference. Excuse me. Made a real difference, and I felt that I could perform at my best. So please fully take advantage of what you're entitled to. And also I'd say make sure that they're actually in place on the day. Sometimes things get forgotten, and it would be a real shame if you missed out because of that. And on a similar thread, I think it's really important that you stand your ground when you're challenged with not that you'll be challenged on your reasonable adjustments, but having them put in place, but also the interview itself. And I think that's all I have to say on reasonable adjustments. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Danielle. Thank you for that. And just to echo exactly what you said, I did my interview through Inner Temple. They were very reasonable about my reasonable adjustments. No one batted an eyelid. I asked, they were given, and it helped me get a scholarship. And I think it's fair to say most of the people conducting those interviews want you to do as well as you can do, and they want it to be fair. But it's also fair to say if you don't identify things, as Danielle said, really, people can't guess, they can't mind read. So if you don't point out what's needed, they're not going to know. So be open about it, state it, and give yourself the best chance you can. Lovely. Thanks so much, Danielle. Roxy, on the subject of preparing for interview, how did you prepare for interview? And did you make any adaptations in your preparation to account for your neurodivergence?
Thanks, Ollie. Yes, I'll come on to that in a bit after I introduce myself. So as Ollie said, I'm Roxy. I'm part of the executive team on neurodiversity in law. I focus mainly on policy issues and talking to chambers about policy changes they can make in their recruitment process. So my current position is I did the bar course last year. I have one more exam left to do, that's criminal litigation, because of all of the delays from the BSB. Thank you, BSB. I'm looking forward to completing my bar course. And I was lucky enough to be awarded the Lincoln's Inn EFTA Court Scholarship. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm in Luxembourg. But I was awarded for my bar course the Cassell Scholarship in 2019 and an accommodation award. And I was also, as a residential scholar, a guinea pig for the panel for interviewers last year. So I have quite a good experience of the Lincoln's Inn interview process. So hopefully what I say will be insightful. So how did I adapt my preparation to my neurodivergence? Well, the first thing I have to say is echoing what Daniel said earlier, is just to be yourself, because I had also interviewed at Middle Temple the year before for a scholarship and not got anything, because at the time I was too focused on trying to appear how I perceived them wanting me to appear, and I was basically too focused on the appearance of a barrister and what they wanted or what I thought they wanted, rather than being myself. So in order to adapt my preparation, I just focused on the experiences that made me unique. And I also didn't cram, because that doesn't work for me. So I made sure that I prepared quite a while in advance, and I knew all my stuff, because you know your experiences better than anyone else. So focus on the things that come to you first in an interview, and be yourself. Have a few answers prepared for questions that you know might come up. So for example, it's really good to prepare a situational example that can be adapted for lots of different things. So that was particularly useful for me. So one for teamwork, be used for leadership, etc. So just pick up some good examples of your experience and adapt them, practice adapting them for the interview process, and that will put you in good stead. So also, I didn't have a script. In the interview for Lincoln's Inn, they ask you to do a presentation, a 10-minute presentation. And I knew from mooting that having scripts didn't work for me because I have a visual processing disorder and sometimes I can read things wrong. And so having a script doesn't really work for me. And I'm better performing just off the cuff. So I had a few pointers for my presentation and I followed those pointers, but I was just myself and that worked out. So yeah, in summary, I would say be yourself. Don't be afraid to tell the panel about your experiences, and that will make you stand out. For example, if you've had a particularly tough time getting to the bar because of your neurodivergence, say that to the panel. Or if you have demonstrated resilience by all of the stuff that you've been through, tell the panel that you've been resilient, and just be confident in yourself and your abilities, and that should get you through. So that's all from me.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Roxy. Richard, how should people approach answering questions during scholarship interviews? And then also, would you mind telling us a bit about the Gray's Inn scholarship process? We've had a question about how residential scholarships work specifically.
Yes, I saw that. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Richard Eschwager. I practice in commercial law. I'm at Brickcourt Chambers. I am a member of Gray's Inn. I was lucky enough to be a Bedingfield scholar and an Atkins scholar, and now I'm involved in the interview process itself. I think I'll answer Ollie's questions in two parts, first in general terms, and then with reference to Gray's Inn, although I imagine the process is probably similar for all the other inns. In terms of sort of preparing to answer the question, well, the first and most important part is actually to listen to the question. You want to listen to the question, not hear the question, but listen to the question so you can take it in. All too often, people begin answering questions without actually identifying what they've been asked to do, and they go off at a tangent. The second point is, having listened to the question, is to, when you are crafting your answers, think about what examples can I draw upon, pertinent examples, which allow me to develop an argument. The third point, I would say, is when you do develop the argument, try to stick to the argument. Don't be put off by questioning that you might get from the panel, but address the questioning and answer the points that are taken against you. What you want to do ideally is anticipate points that may be made against you, to show the panel that you can deal with points as and when they arise. And finally, as a sort of a general comment, I think it's important not to overcomplicate things. It doesn't matter if you can keep points simple. Often the simplest points, which are clear and coherent, are the most persuasive. So that would be sort of my general advice when it comes to answering the questions at the interview process itself. How does that relate to the process at Gray's Inn? And as I said, I imagine it's very similar to other inns. Well, at Gray's, at the interview stage, the panel is interested in hearing your answers so that it can gather together a body of evidence. And what your answers ideally need to do is they need to show on the evidence that you have met the particular threshold. Now, that evidence is assessed, broadly speaking, by about 4 criteria. The first criteria is problem solving. The second criterion is drive and determination. The third is your oral advocacy. And the fourth is your motivation to succeed. Well, what do they mean? Problem solving is about your ability to extract key information from complicated points, and then use that information to develop an argument. Drive and determination is about you telling the panel or giving the panel an example where you've overcome particular barriers or obstacles, but also how you've remained calm under pressure. Oral advocacy is being able to communicate clearly, concisely, succinctly, persuasively. And a motivation to succeed is you being able to show the panel that you have an interest in the bar and give examples of how you've developed that interest, whether it be through visits to the court, mini pupillage, involvement in legal societies, and so on. Now, there were two questions I saw on the chat. One first was on the topical question at Gray's Inn. So like at Inner Temple, before the interview, we give candidates a question. We don't give a case, but we give, say, a topical question. That would be related to the law, but won't necessarily be in and of itself a legal question. I mean, for example, it might be a question about policy. It might be a question, say, about civil liberties, about parliamentary sovereignty. So on the cusp of sort of law, general affairs, that sort of topic. And when you're answering the topical question, there's no right or wrong. What the panel is interested in is your ability to develop the argument, take points against you, see what might be said, and then address the point why your position is actually the correct one. And that's really what I imagine all-ins are looking at. They're looking at your ability to answer by reference to principles rather than necessarily by reference to a particular body of knowledge. Because obviously candidates will have all different experiences of law, be interested in different practice areas. And so it's the principles that panels are interested in rather than necessarily sort of technical details on the law. And then the point is about residential scholars. So, I mean, broadly speaking, if you are lucky enough to be awarded a Gray's Inn Scholar, you can also then apply for a residential award. You need to show that there's a good reason for you to be in the inn. I mean, I'm not sure entirely of the number of flats available. I think we've got another Gray's Inn member here who is in fact in one of the Gray's Inn flats at the moment, so he's probably better placed than me to answer that question. But it's a great honour to be a residential scholar at Gray's Inn, like no doubt it's a great honour to get a scholarship at any of the inns. And on that, I think I'll hand back to Ollie.
Fantastic, Richard. Thank you so much for that. That was really insightful. Now, on to Sophie. Now, not to give it away before you've said it yourself, but you were asked a question that was particularly pertinent to the topic of this evening. Would you care to tell us what that question was in your interview and how you approached it and how you think other people should approach similar questions?
Yeah, so firstly, I'm Sophie, everyone, and I'm a media executive at ND Law. I'm currently on the BPC at ULaw, having firstly completed a history degree and then a master's in law with an incorporated GDL, also at the University of Law. The question I was asked during my interview at Middle Temple was basically, how would I explain to someone who has a neurodivergent condition how to succeed becoming a barrister? And it was their opening question to me, and I actually felt really comfortable asking it. So my first bit of advice when you're asked something either like that or anything to do with your neurodivergence, be honest and give them an honest answer. Don't try and make yourself seem something you're not or what you think they might want to know about that question. So I was honest. I started straight with the negative that everyone goes with, and then I moved swiftly on to turn it into something that was really positive. So I said, yeah, it's difficult being dyslexic and wanting to be a barrister, but I simply said, you know, I cope with it in this way, in that way, and then in another way. So I said I mind map a lot, I revise early, and I told them the truth of how I approach everything in order to get to the bar. And I think the best advice I can give is just tell them honestly what you do in order to overcome the negative that everyone seems to think it is, and turn that into a positive. I didn't say I did a really dyslexic thing. I didn't mention right at the start. I did get a Middle Temple scholarship, and I got the Diplock scholarship in 2020. And just some general advice: no matter what the question is, answer it with a smile and be really confident in that answer that you give, because I always think a smile goes a really long way. And these people are interviewing, particularly at Middle, they're interviewing over 400 applicants sometimes, because everyone gets an interview. And having sat through, I don't know, 50, 60 interviews that day, coming in with a smile right from the start, being really friendly and really open, will instantly build that rapport with those panel members. And I think that's probably one of the most important things you should do.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Soph. We really appreciate that, and the fact that you're willing to be and able to be so open and honest about your experience. And I completely echo what you've said. I think certainly my experience of neurodiversity is that it's as much a, well, maybe not as much a positive as a negative, but it's a mix. It's a mixed bag. It's both. You may find certain challenges come your way, and you may find certain advantages as well. Dealing with it head on is often the best way to deal with questions asked along those lines. So I completely echo what Sophie said. Now on to our very own Jack Boswell. Jack, you're, as has been touched on briefly already, a residential scholar at Gray's, and also, I believe, pretty hot on your legal current affairs. Would you mind talking about both of those things, please?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Ollie. And good evening, everyone. As Ollie says, I'm Jack Boswell. I'm a bar school student at ULaw as well, and also a membership and GDPR officer for neurodiversity in law. I'm a scholar at Gray's Inn. I got the Arthwot Scholarship as well as the residential scholarship. What Richard said about the residential scholarship is absolutely right. If you're awarded a cash scholarship from Gray's Inn, you are then also eligible for a residential scholarship. And there is one further piece of written application and one further interview with slightly different criteria, which are exactly as Richard set out. It's a massive privilege, and I would give lots of encouragement to anybody who's thinking about it, that you should apply for a residential scholarship. They're also available from Lincoln's Inn, although I'll give a special shout out to Gray's Inn because the apartments are especially swanky. So it's well worth an application. In terms of the question that was put to me about staying abreast of current affairs, as Ollie alluded to in the question, this is really important for your interview. I would say it's especially important for Gray's Inn because of what Richard has already mentioned. The first part of the interview involves discussing a given topic, which is likely to test your understanding of legal current affairs. But I think in any event, at each of the inns at an interview, it's likely that they will expect some kind of understanding of legal current affairs and they will test you on that. So being prepared for those kind of questions will stand you in good stead. But just to reassure people watching, I don't think you're going to be quizzed on the details of the latest Court of Appeal judgments or any obscure statutory instruments or what the Attorney General likes to eat for breakfast or anything like that. Really, what they're going to expect of you is that you have an understanding of the most significant developments in the law in general, and probably also those that are facing the bar in particular. In terms of how to develop that understanding in preparation for the interview, I would suggest that the best way to do that is to sign up for the current awareness email that the Inner Temple Library sends out. And I'll put a link in the chat to the page where you can sign up for that email in a moment. Essentially, it's a service where they will send you an email every day with 5 to 10 articles from the legal press. And I'm not suggesting that you should read each and every one of those articles every day. I certainly don't. But if you skim through that email and see what the headlines are, notice which topics are coming up again and again, it'll give you a pretty good sense of the kind of issues that you're likely to be tested on. And then pick out a few articles on each of those topics and read them. Be aware of what the issues are. And I think something that's really important and which people might sort of miss out is that you should develop an opinion about that topic as well. And it should be an informed opinion. So you should be ready with a few reasons why you hold that opinion and be prepared to be pressed on it. And a good way to be prepared for that is to consider the opposing point of view. See not only what other people are saying as the opposing point of view, but how you would argue it if you were asked to argue it the other way. You might even have a slightly meaner interviewer who asks you to anticipate those counter arguments, and they might ask you to put them to them. But even if not, you'll get some pushback, and it would be useful if you can anticipate those counter arguments and be equipped to deal with them. So I will put that link in the chat now, and that's all that I have to say about staying abreast of current affairs.
Great.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jack. Really appreciate that. On to Jeannie, which I have to say, special credit certainly must go to someone who's attended today to give all the viewers, as it were, time after just, I believe, coming straight from part of your application for tenancy. So you've had a particularly stressful day, and we really appreciate you being here. Now, I believe I'm right in saying that you have a non-legal background. I'd love if you could share for us how you think people can use non-legal work experience to assist their applications and their interviews.
Hi, yeah. So thanks for the introduction. I had a particularly stressful day today for all of those who want to join the criminal bar. I was in court until 5:30, and then I had to get an Uber to get home to do my tenancy applications, like an oral advocacy application thing. And I finished that, and then I go on to this. So be prepared. Yeah, so I'm a pupil barrister. I'm a third six pupil barrister at 25 Bedford Row, where we exclusively defend. And I do hold a scholarship from Lincoln's Inn. I'm a Law Denning Scholar, and I got it in 2017. So I'm hearing a lot of different things, and I think maybe the application process has changed somewhat, especially when it comes to residential scholars. But anyways, be that as it may, the thing that I wanted to talk about was sort of a non-legal work experience and non-legal backgrounds. I think there must be, I can't be the only one, a lot of applicants who think, well, I don't look like what a barrister looks like. I don't sound like what a barrister might sound like. I don't have the background of what a barrister might be like. And so how do I prove that I still belong here, that I'm still allowed to take up space here? So one of the things that I think is really important is understanding and learning how to use your non-traditional backgrounds, your non-traditional work experience to your favor. So at the time when I was applying, I think, trying to think back, but I had just finished my bachelor's degree and my master's degree as well. But I hadn't any work experience. So I didn't undertake, the tons and tons of mini pupilages that you're expected to do. I hadn't worked as a paralegal, and I just had the feeling that everybody who was applying around me brought a lot with them. And I thought, I must be at a disadvantage because I haven't done all of that. But what I did have, for example, was the fact that when I was doing my undergrad, I was living here in the UK, and I was working as a waitress. And I was working as a waitress part-time. So I was doing, I don't know how many hours a week, but long hours. And I decided to use that in my application because working as a waitress is advocacy. It's time management, it's disaster management, it's doing 20 things at the same time and making sure that table 17 doesn't die because of their peanut allergy. So obviously it's not like a glamorous job or anything like that, but it is a job and it is a whole lot of responsibility, and they are transferable skills. So what I did was put that on my application, sort of in the section of like other jobs held, other positions of responsibility. And we ended up talking about that for quite some time in my application. So when it came to advocacy skills, for example, I did undertake a MOOC when I was in undergrad, but it was like 3 people. It's not glamorous, but it's fine. I did that, but I didn't want to talk about the mood because that to me wasn't a good example for oral advocacy. That was, in my opinion, quite a contrived sort of situation. Instead, I spoke about advocacy in terms of my work as a waitress, when you have to resolve conflict, when you have to make sure that you communicate well, that everybody understands what you're saying. When I was working as a waitress, I was running my own section. So I had other people on my team that I had to sort of direct, okay, you take this section, you take that section, I'm going to move you over there, this needs to be done. It's clear communication under a whole lot of pressure. That is advocacy. It's not fancy advocacy, but it's advocacy nonetheless. It's effective communication. So I made sure that I used that. I also used that job to prove that I have time management skills, because when you're working from 7 p.m. until 3 a.m. and you have a 9 a.m. lecture next day, that is time management. How do you stay on top of all of your exams? How do you stay on top of all of your deadlines and so on? So that's what I used as well. I told them exactly how I stay on top of everything that I do. It shows that I have a mind that can, you see now my mind is gone, I forgot the word I was going to use, but that I can sort of prepare myself, that I can stay on track, that I can, manage my time and manage, as I'm doing now, my caseload. So, once you get to practicing, you're going to have a number of cases all running at the same time. You have to know how to stay on top of that. And I was able to prove how I stay on top of, as it was at the time, my studies. So my point is that a non-traditional background, even something as simple, in inverted commas, it's not simple, as running drinks and running food for a living, is absolutely invaluable. Another thing that it teaches you is people skills. Not everybody is going to be kind and patient and so on. It's Friday night, people are annoyed, they want to be seated, all these kinds of things. You need to be able to deal with difficult people. You will be shouted at by your clients. This is just speaking for the criminal bar. You will be yelled at. If they are convicted, it will be your fault, right? So you need to learn how to deal with difficult people. And it's one of the things I spoke about as well in my application at Lincoln's, in my interview, that I know how to handle difficult situations, how to stay calm, I know how to deal with things almost. So don't be afraid if you haven't done 700 many pupilages, if you haven't worked as a paralegal. It shouldn't be a hindrance. It's not a hindrance if you can demonstrate what you've learned. And that's all I have to say on that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. That's really interesting, really insightful. I mean, my quite lengthy work experience before joining the bar included a year as effectively a bin man on a ski hill. And it was valuable, interesting experience that I was able to tie in. I think I completely echo what you say. I think the part of the art of it is finding and being able to sell why your experiences are relevant as much as what those experiences actually were and where they've come from. So thank you so much. I think it was really insightful. Emma, on to you. I know you're also a budding career changer. How have you used, or how did you use your experiences from your previous and indeed current work to help you in your interview?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Emma. I'm with Middle Temple, and I was awarded the Rosina Hare Scholarship in 2020. My background is in midwifery. So how I dealt with my interview, the panel were very interested to know why suddenly I wanted to come to the bar after being a midwife. And I could show that midwifery had so many transferable skills to that of a barrister. For example, negotiating. When I cared for women in labour and they wanted an epidural and they wanted it now, unfortunately they couldn't have it because the anaesthetist would be tied up in theatre. So I had to negotiate and persuade them to have an alternative pain relief. Communication is so important for a barrister, and especially I could show that I could communicate with not only women and their families, with other health professionals, and at difficult times, and telling them things that were difficult in difficult situations. I could also show the panel how, when I worked as a band 6 midwife, and I had a team of 4 other midwives who were band 5 under me, I ran a busy ward and I looked after 20 mothers and they each had babies. And I had to, make sure that I was organized, my team was organized, there were time pressures because the NHS, they want the beds, everybody, new women are delivering all the time, and how you keep calm when things aren't really going your way. But also, as a midwife and a barrister, you meet very vulnerable people, and the people are often coming to you at really vulnerable points in their life when they need your help. And I think to be able to deal with vulnerable people is really important, to just listen to them. That's all they want sometimes. And you will get a lot from your clients if you just listen to them. I also think, back to advocacy, when I looked after a woman and she wanted a water birth, but it wasn't feasible, I had to then go to the doctor and say, actually, no, she can't have a water birth, that she wants a water birth, because she's got medical conditions that won't allow for it. So I had to try and balance the needs of the client, but also being, respectful to the health professionals that were trying to care for the women alongside me, and just collaborating with different people in that situation. Being a midwife also involved, believe it or not, lots of research. I remember running an antenatal clinic, and I was trying to get my woman at the time to have the flu jab, and she said, absolutely not, I'm not having it, why do I have to have it? And because I had done my research, I was able to advise her on, why it would be beneficial to her. And then with that advice from my research, she could then make that informed decision to have that or not. So I think if you don't come from straight from school and you've had, various careers, just have a look back at what you've done and how they can apply to that of a barrister, because so many other careers are so transferable to a barrister. You really will be surprised when you look back on it. I would definitely advocate it when you are answering and writing your applications to use the STAR method. I know that that's previously been spoken about, but it helps you to be clear and concise and avoid the waffle. And with that, Ollie, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Emma. Yeah, no, that was really interesting, and I think really builds upon what's already been said, that it really does come down to finding the experiences you already have. They could be in a range of things, and applying them to how, as you say, they're transferable. And for clarity for everyone, the STAR method is situation, task, action, response. What was the scenario? What were you required to do? What did you do? And how did it go? We've had a question, actually it came a while ago. Thank you very much for that, which is for Dan, which was, what resources did you use to select your practice cases? That was relating to practicing reading cases quickly to draw out the key information. Dan?
Thanks, Ollie, and thanks for the question. It's a very good question. Unfortunately, there's no magic to it. There's no easy way to do it. I think I remember the way I did it was just going on to Bailey or Westlaw or LexisNexis and searching for cases, family cases or criminal cases were the easiest ones to select, I think. And then going through the list and looking at, perhaps focusing on more recent cases in case they were the ones that were likely to come up, clicking on the judgment, seeing if it was relatively short. You don't want to be selecting a very lengthy judgment, but something that is relatively short that you can comfortably, or perhaps not so comfortably, read within 15 or 20 minutes. Go through that list, pick out 10 or 20. It doesn't really matter what the facts are. It doesn't really matter about the content as long as it's the right length, and just practice reading through those and taking notes, as I suggested earlier. Thanks, Ollie. Great,
thank you, Dan. And in fact, what's just occurred to me, potentially dovetailing of a tip we had from Jack earlier, if you do sign up to the Inner Temple Bulletin, you're going to be highlighted with new interesting cases that have come up. Maybe see if some of them are the same length as well. But otherwise, I'd like Dan said, I'd go straight to Bailey and see what there is. So a huge thank you to our panelists there. They've managed to, between them, all keep beautifully to time, and we are in fact on time in spite of having 9 separate people speaking on a range of topics. So I'm hugely grateful to them. Sit tight. We will be coming to a couple of interviews with some very, very brave volunteers who are willing to be questioned and deliver their answers live in front of all of you. But I'm just going to pause there briefly because we won't be recording the interviews, so the recording will end there. But if you're watching this sometime in the future, thank you very much for sitting through it, and I hope it was helpful.